Welcome, I'm Dr. Troy Podell, and welcome to this very special edition of our Career Cafe program. I have with me an old friend of mine who I'm so excited to introduce you to, Mr. Don Dougherty of Classroom Adventure Stories. Don, welcome to the cafe.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
So Don, you and I, we go way back. Not too far back, right?
14 or 15 years.
14, 15 years to adjacent desks at CBS Radio, selling advertising together. And we both made career pivots into the world of education. So I'd love to hear about what you're doing now, and we'll then take a few steps back and talk about the path to get there, if that's okay.
Sure.
So what is Classroom Adventure Stories, and tell us about it, because it's really fantastic.
Here's what I do. I believe I have the best job in the world because I get paid to have an awful lot of fun. I am a professional storyteller. I'm not sure if you've heard of a professional storyteller before. There's not a lot of us in the world. But what I do, Troy, is I write my own original stories, children's stories, aimed at 3 to maybe 10 or 11 years of age. And then I take those stories and I perform them at local child care centers, elementary schools, malls, libraries, and every now and then even some high schools. And I also do teacher workshops. But my stories are a little bit different than most children's stories because there are two things that I do that are different and cool, and the kids really love it. And the first is, when I write a story, I dump a lot of characters into the story because I know when I get to each child care center or mall or library, I'm going to take the first names of all the children sitting in the audience, and they are going to be those main characters in the story.
So
and as right, so I begin to tell the story, and they hear their friends' names, you know, their classmates, and then they hear their own names, and their eyes light up. The second thing that I do that the kids really like a lot, and it's really kind of cool for them, is I make my stories highly interactive. So I bring in props, and I hand them out to all the kids, not just a select few. I hand them out to everybody, and then they act out the adventures in the story. So for instance, one of my stories is a campfire story.
Oh, cool.
Okay? So imagine me in a room, a classroom, a big classroom where you can fit all the kids, sitting in a chair, although I don't use the chair very often. We put the kids on the floor, and then we pretend there's a campfire between us because it's a campfire story. But we don't normally build one because that'd be dangerous.
Right.
And early on in the story, suddenly there's an earthquake. So now the children and the teachers and myself, we start doing this, right? Because there's an earthquake. And that earthquake is going to shake some of those imaginary logs at that imaginary campfire and start a small forest fire. So now, everybody in the audience will pretend to grab buckets and whoosh, we put the fire out. After the fire comes what is most kids' favorite scene. Are you ready?
Yeah, go for it, man.
After the fire, there's a big, big storm. There's an awful lot of wind because I've handed fans out to all the children and they start waving them back and forth. There's an awful lot of rain because I have a squirt bottle. I bought it at Dollar Tree. Guess how much it cost me?
$1.
Very good. And I start squirting all the children. And I don't know what it is with little kids, but they love to get wet. Especially when they think they're not supposed to be getting wet, like in a classroom, right? So they're jumping up and down. Get me, get me, get me. I'm running around the whole room making sure everybody's getting wet. There's thunder. I have the children shout, rumble, 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 boom. And then there's lightning. You know, we're in a TV studio here, but right outside this room is a photography studio. And I have this old battery-operated detachable flash from an old film camera. You remember film?
I do. Yeah. I do.
The audience, the people who listen to
Probably
film.
not.
Yeah.
Film was a thing that we used to record stuff onto. Yeah.
You had to send it away. It took weeks to get your pictures back.
Right.
But I have this old battery-operated detachable flash from my old Canon AE1 film camera, and I use that as lightning. So the story is personalized to every audience I tell it to. The names of the characters always change, and it's always, always highly interactive. And it's a lot of fun. And I've learned throughout, you know, even as a student, that I would retain lessons much better if I learned it in a fun and stimulating fashion. And so what I do is I call them life lessons. You can call them character development lessons if you want. But I attach these life lessons to each of these stories. We have an awful lot of fun, and then when the story's over, I go through that story and explain the life lessons that I've attached to it. Important things like perseverance, cooperation. I have a story that has an anti-bullying message. I have a story that teaches us to be thankful for the things that we take for granted.
Oh, so huge.
Right. So these are all important lessons, and I teach them to, you know, children between the age of 3 to 10 or 11 in a very fun and stimulating fashion, and then the lessons tends to stick.
Well, there is a lot to be said, not to be too much of an academic, in the scholarship for enhanced student engagement and what it does for not only memory, but for then application later on. I mean, kids that experience your stories then are not only more likely to retain what you've said, but then to bring it into the world with them. That's really cool.
Exactly. I did a birthday party once for the child himself is only 1 year old, but a lot of the kids there were older. And I did a birthday party, and I got a letter, a thank you card, about, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks later from the mom who had hired me for this party, and she said, I have to tell you this story. She wrote it all down. She said, I was sitting in the park a week or two after that party and talking to one of the other moms, and her son, I forget his name, let's call him Billy.
Sure.
Her son had finally passed his swimming test.
Oh.
It took him weeks. But when the mom picked him up from the swimming lesson and said, congratulations, you passed, what was the difference? He said to her, I remembered that man in the park telling the story about never give up. And that's what I did today. I had perseverance, and I never gave up, and I passed my test. So it works. Even at a young age, it sticks.
And that's the ultimate, right? When you're in education, either formal or informal, right? When you know that there's like palpable change and positive change in a kid's life as a result of your efforts, I mean, it's priceless.
It's a wonderful feeling. It really is.
I do want to take into account, though, the fact that like you've also taken a tremendous risk by doing this, right? Leaving the corporate world, because I remember when you first told me that you were doing it, I'm like, wow, that's really cool. But wow, that's also kind of a risk, right?
It was really scary. And it was more scary to my wife than it was to me. She was originally not happy about it. But yeah, I mean, because you're right, we worked in corporate America together. I had a decent job. I was making decent money. Not as you were a much better salesperson.
Don't stop it.
But I was making okay money, and I had benefits and whatnot. And then, yeah, I left that comfort zone. But I really feel, Troy, that this, what I'm doing now is more of a calling than a career. I just felt called to this. I felt that I was put in these situations, and I heard different people say different things and ask me different questions that led me to this career.
So how'd you decide to make that change?
Oh, that's a good question. Part of it was when we worked together at the radio station, we had those events, the book clubs.
Right.
And at one of those radio events, I met a group of teachers. They were there to see the local host, Michael Smerconish. Remember Michael Smerconish?
Of course I do. I still write for his website.
Okay, so they were there to see this event, but they were local teachers in a local elementary school. And I was talking to them, and I found out they were teachers, and I told them about these stories I'd written for my children, and I performed at my children's classrooms for free, just as a dad. And they said, boy, that's really interesting. We would maybe love for you to come to our school and do that. So I did. I went. I took a personal day because I was still working at the radio station, and I went, and they loved it. And word started to spread. This was a school down in Delaware County, Norwood Elementary. I'm not sure if I can mention another school.
That's fine.
It was Norwood Elementary in another county, in Delaware County. And word about me began to spread around the Delco area.
So you went viral.
Yeah. Not so much online.
Word of mouth.
Yeah, right? yeah. And so I started getting calls from child care centers and other schools in Delaware County. And one thing led to another, and it got to the point where I thought I could make probably at least as much as I was making in radio. Again, I wasn't making that great in radio. Doing this.
You did plenty well, Doug, and you taught me a lot of important lessons about how to be a good salesman, how to be a great professional, and how to be a great man.
And actually the sales background, because I still sell,
right.
But I'm just selling my own services. So the sales background has helped me in this too. And my performance background, having done some plays back in when I was high school and college, certainly helps me as a storyteller. So
you almost never know what those experiences are going to be and how you're going to leverage them moving forward into different career opportunities.
It's much easier looking back.
Right.
I look back at that Michael Smerconish book club where, I just happened to be in front of these teachers talking to them, and it's really weird.
One thing leads to another.
You never know. Yeah.
It's almost like an invisible hand pushing fate in that direction.
Yeah, truly.
So you have this sales background. Tell us about your path, right? 22-year-old Don Dougherty is starting out in life, and how does he get to radio and then to classroom adventure stories?
Well, you know, when I went to college, I majored in communications, and I envisioned myself as being an on-air personality on a radio station. Back in the 70s and 80s and through the 90s, there was a guy out in New York. You're from New York. There's a radio DJ named Don Imus.
I remember Don Imus very well.
I wanted to be the next Don Imus. And he was kind of the original shock jock. Howard Stern came after him, but I wanted to be somebody like him. So I went to school for communications. Along the way, took some acting courses because that was all part of it.
Right.
But then when I got out of school, I started sending resumes and tapes, which you have to do to be a radio DJ, to all these radio stations, and I got rejection after rejection after rejection, although I now preach perseverance, so never give up, just keep going. But I kept going as far as I could. I got a couple radio jobs that weren't paying very well, and I wanted to settle down and get married, so I got into sales jobs because they tended to pay a little bit better. One thing led to another. I found myself at this Michael Smerconish book club meeting, talking to these teachers, and here I am, and I was 45 at the time I made that career change, which is not a great time to make a career change. If you're in high school, take your chances now because it's less risky.
Right.
You know, you don't have a family to take care of. At the time, I was the father of 3. Yeah, I already had all 3. Father of 3, married, a couple mortgages. So it was scary. It was scary. But 12 years later, I'm not a millionaire, but I have the best job in the world. I get paid to have fun. I think it might have been Mark Twain. This quote is attributed to a bunch of different people, but I go with Mark Twain because I'm a writer. But Mark Twain once said, if you can find something that you love to do and then find a way to get paid to do it, you won't work a day in your life.
Which is exactly what I coach the students on here.
In the last 12 years, I've not worked a day in my life. I sometimes look forward to getting back from vacation to work because my job is so much fun.
It's crazy when you can wake up on Monday morning and say TGIM.
Yeah.
Right? That's how you know that you found your niche,
Yeah.
right? You found your calling. And you had an interesting sales background. Particularly, I remember you sold a lot of different stuff.
I did.
And those sales skills just kind of translated and translated and translated.
It's true. I started off, I think one of the first things I sold was cellular phones, but back in the day, they called them car phones.
Right, there were these big suitcase kind of deals.
Yeah. Had those, and then when they finally got to be smartphones, I was out long before that. But along the way, first it was not even those suitcase phones. It was a phone that was only installed in your vehicle.
Wow.
So you had to be in your car to use this phone. Then they came out with these, they called them bag phones. But yeah, it looked like a suitcase or a woman's purse you carried around. When you're in the car, you would plug it into a cigarette lighter. When you were out of the car, it had a battery so you could use it. Then they came up with the first handheld phone. But the first handheld phone was about this big.
It was a brick.
Yeah. They called it the brick phone, that's right. And then they came out with the flip phones. And then I got out right about the time that flip phones came out. And the first flip phones were really big too. But then I got into medical marketing, medical advertising, and then eventually radio advertising. And now I kind of sell storytelling.
And our paths crossed those 14, 15 years ago, and
radio.
Here we are today.
Yeah.
Don, one of the reasons why I wanted so desperately to have you here is I feel like, I know, as a businessman, and I've seen the way that you conduct yourself, you always put your values first in how you deal with other people. And I'd like to have you speak to that and why that's important for an entrepreneur and a professional.
Well, first of all, thanks. And second of all, it's true. But a lot of that had to do with the way I was raised. You know, my parents instilled core values in me. And I went to 16 years of Catholic school. So along the way, priests and nuns also reinforced the values that my parents had instilled in me. So, you know, for me, it's all about being fair and treating people with integrity and respect and hoping that they're going to treat me the same way. And I try to bring that to business as well. Every now and then, someone will overpay me. And, you know, I'll say, whoa, you've got to rewrite this check because that's too much. And they certainly appreciate that. But it's the right thing to do. I mean, it's absolutely the right thing to do. I can't go out and tell stories and have fun if I'm doing the wrong thing. I would feel really guilty about it.
It's hollow, right?
Yeah, exactly. So to be privileged enough to actually earn a living and have fun doing it, you know, I've got to keep in the back of my mind that the most important thing is to be true to yourself and true to your core values. And if you can bring that to business, and that's accepted. And if your core values are good, most people are going to accept that.
Right. You know, nice guys do finish first. Eventually, it's a long game, but you know, a big believer in it. So thank you for sharing that.
Oh, sure.
I have one more question for you.
Okay.
And I ask this of all of my guests.
Okay.
You've got a lifetime of like really awesome experience. You've raised 3 children so well, and you've got a wonderful wife. Hi, Dottie. How are you doing? And you're a pillar of your community. You're an upstanding gentleman. You're an entrepreneur. Go back in time to 17-year-old Don Dougherty. Okay? You could grab him by the shoulders and tell him one thing. What would it be?
Good question. Probably start this earlier. It took me a long time to get to, again, 17, you're getting ready to graduate. I graduated high school at 17. I turned 18 a few months later. But I'm 17 years old, I'm graduating high school, and I've got to decide what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. That's a big question to ask a 17-year-old. And if you would have told me when I was 17 that I would eventually be a professional storyteller, I would have said, you're crazy. But I would go back and shake my younger self and say, start writing children's stories and start going and performing them now, because I would have skipped everything else, and it would have been easier too. You know, I would have had a lot of family support and not having to support a family.
Right.
So follow your dreams. Follow your dreams now, and if they don't pan out, have a backup plan, but follow your dreams when you're young, because it's a lot easier, an awful lot, and a lot less risky.
Don, sage advice. Thank you very much for joining us today. That'll about do it for our very special edition of the Career Cafe with Don Dougherty. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, Troy. This was great.